Hey, what's going on? Why am I back at GameStop?
You are here to stand in the place where so many have fallen. To work hours beyond what any would consider reasonable. To stare into the maw of chaos and dare to blink. You, my friend, have been summoned once more to fight in the glorious battle of retail. Black Friday.
Oh, come on, are you serious? I already did my time.
A soldier's duty is never done. Did the heroes of gaming give up? When the universe was at stake, did Master Chief just leave the Covenant to their ways? When the Reapers entered our galaxy, did Commander Shepard just surrender? When darkness swept over the land, did the hero of time simply watch? Think about all the heroes across history's gaming. Think about what they would do. What about games like BioShock, Assassin's Creed?
What about them? This is a writing podcast.
Sorry I'm late. I had to stop at the gym. Arnold, didn't you go to the gym earlier? Yeah, but that was my breakfast workout. I need second breakfast, like a hobbit.
I don't think hobbits work out, Arnold.
It's true. Hobbitses don't work as arts. They don't like the gym. Neither do we.
Yes, another of our fine soldiers.
You know, General, I don't think these two are cut out for customer service.
Hi, hello, sorry I'm late. I was reading chapter 5 of the Order of the Pawn.
Oh, hey, Fenton. Tell me, did you like this one better?
It's progress, Bradley. Let's leave it at that.
Hey, we're here too, ready to work the dreaded Black Friday.
Or, you can just cut us if you're already fully staffed. We don't need the hours.
What are you talking about? Speak for yourself.
Gentlemen, none of you need worry. We have help to assist us in this great battle of gaming's retail. May I introduce SAR AI?
Oh, I get it. It's like Sarai from Devine. Oh, that's nice. Thanks for clarifying, Fenton.
SAR AI was developed in conjunction with author J.M. Gooding. She is the latest in AI-powered retail technology and can assist with any and all customers' queries.
I'll be the judge of that. Hey, SAR AI, give me the name of a game I'm thinking of.
I don't know anything about it except it has a guy with white hair who fights with a sword.
Processing. The game you are referring to is Devil May Cry.
Lucky guess.
Ooh, tell us about our game as this is.
The Lord of the Rings, Gollum, is widely regarded as one of the worst games ever made.
Oh, I see.
Hey, SAR AI, what podcast are we on?
This is the Saved as Draft podcast.
No! What have you done? The intro's gonna end now before our glorious battle can begin.
Yeah, General, that's the idea. I'm not working Black Friday again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 45 of the Saved as Draft podcast. It's Black Friday, and I am so very grateful to not be working in retail. Though I do sympathize with anyone who is working today, or has worked it in the past. I myself worked in retail for nearly 10 years, and those Black Fridays at GameStop were always like working inside of a hurricane. I really don't miss it, but retail war stories aside, it's good to be back for another week of shoutouts, writing discussion, and of course, a featured guest interview. This week, I'm sitting down with J.M. Gooding for an absolutely amazing discussion that covers the full range of his work, which blurs the line between genres. Quick reminder that the new horror magazine that I mentioned last week as well, called the Oblivion Index, is still accepting submissions for their first issue. Submissions are open until December 15th, and yes, this is a reminder for me to submit mine as well. I really don't want to miss this opportunity, and I know a lot of you won't want to miss it either. That's all the housekeeping for this week, so let's dive into our first round of shoutouts from the Unquiet World event and the weekly subscriber chat thread right after a quick word from this week's sponsor. Today's episode of the Saved as Draft podcast is sponsored by Story Snacks, now in 15 new flavors. I've got so much writing to do, but I'm also really hungry. Ugh, I don't have time to cook. Maybe I'll just order something.
Stop right there. You can't let something like the tug of the mortal coil interrupt your flow state.
Yeah, but I need food.
Try one of these.
A jelly bean?
It's a story snack, a brand new food formulated for writers with over 50 grams of protein per serving.
Oh, wow! It tastes like the blood of my enemies.
That's right. Story snacks come in a variety of flavors that writers will love, like your reader's tears, finishing the first draft of your novel, and positive feedback from one of your favorite authors.
That's amazing! Let me try another one. Oh, what's in the biggest idea?
Oops, you got one of our typo beans. Some story snacks will temporarily remove your ability to formulate basic sentences, adding a fun new challenge. Don't worry, it only lasts for 6 hours.
Wow! That was super fun!
Forget cooking and leave the drive-thru behind. Try story snacks today and feed your hunger for stories. Pair with Story Sense candles for even deeper immersion.
And we're back. We'll start with 3 shoutouts for our stories submitted to Jennifer Jorgensen's ongoing event, The Unquiet World. Remember, The Unquiet World is a shared universe that anyone can contribute to where spirits from across history all return to our world. Check the show notes for a link to learn more if you're interested in submitting. Now, let's see what new stories emerged from this event. Our first Unquiet World shoutout this week is The Old Blood of Bjornfell by this week's guest, J.M. Gooding. As you'll hear about in our interview this episode, J.M. has been delving into stories that combine folklore with historical warfare. He's very careful about ensuring the historical outcome of these battles doesn't change, but he does introduce varying levels of horror and other elements to entice readers to dig deeper into the folklore that inspired the piece. In this case, we're talking about Draugr, and they manage to show up in the midst of a battle on a snowy mountain. The story begins with some excellent and tightly paced action before pivoting to an unseen horror and some truly gruesome kills. As always, JM's balance between realism and folklore here is superb. I can see why people love these stories. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. Einar forces himself to swallow. The air tastes like copper in winter. Larson whispers behind him. What? What did that? Einar doesn't answer. He reaches out and touches the axe head with the back of his glove. Frost cracks off it in a thin shell. The iron is old. Too old. Older than the rifle leaning against the dead man's boots. Older than the war. Older than any reason this thing should be here. He pulls his hand back. Something outside the nest shifts the snow. A deep, slow drag. Einar's pulse climbs into his throat, and then the second howl tears up the slope. Closer, sharper, a command, not a celebration. It shoves the snow off branches. It rattles Einar's balance even though he's braced against the stone. He turns his head toward the tree line. The storm gusts once more, clearing the air between him and the tree trunks. Something stands there at the edge of the woods, not fully seen, just a massive shape hunched forward, shoulders too broad, head cocked in a way that suggests curiosity instead of threat. Frost clings to its shape in thick plates, the way ice forms on things that haven't breathed in centuries. Whew, amazing. I love JM's writing style so much. Definitely check that one out. Really enjoyed it. Our second Unquiet World shoutout this week is Beast of Chicago by Matthew. I really enjoy the opening of this story. It paints a picture of someone who's skeptical about demons and the supernatural, only for them to describe an event that shook them to their core. And of course, we go back to that event in the story. It's a classic structure, but it works to hook the reader in. The writing style here is really good as well. It's first person, but it has this sort of hesitant word choice to it that conveys fear really nicely. In that way, it feels a little bit like H.P. Lovecraft's style of writing, which of course is a huge compliment coming from me, since I myself specialize in cosmic horror. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. And I find it hard to describe what I heard then, so please forgive me if my words come across as mad or cold-hearted. But as one of the higher-up holes gently opened its small door in the dead, calm air, what met my ears was at first faint. A whimper, impossible to detect where it came from exactly as I stood frozen, locking my limbs in the exposure of that basement. Then rose gently, like it clawed its way out of the December snow or out of a cold, packed grave. At first, my mind spun circles to rationalize the crying, and my mouth stood gaping. In want to call out and find the source of this strangled voice, dejected and feminine to my ears, until I quickly found it hopeless with my nerves, On top of the growing mania in her rhythm, I put aside some of the fear and made my way back to the passage leading up. Excellent work. Great atmosphere in that piece as well. Our third Unquiet World shoutout this week is The Haunted Happenings at Muckleby House, The Roman and the Roomba by Verdant Butterfly. This is one of several stories Verdant Butterfly has done in Jennifer Jorgensen's Connected Universe, but it's one of my favorites. It was also featured in Derek James Kritzberg's Dread Reviews newsletter earlier this week, in which I co-authored that segment of the piece with him as well. It's a hilarious take on the concept here, which of course is about a house overflowing with restless spirits. In this one, we examine the ongoing battle between a Roomba and a deceased Roman legionnaire. Yes, you heard that right. It's every bit as hilarious as it sounds, trust me. As usual with Verdant Butterfly's comedy stories, her sense of humor is spot on. The story takes its premise seriously though, but the narrator isn't afraid to poke fun at the Legionnaire's actions. I also love how this piece describes the reactions of other spirits in the house from different time periods. One even refers to the Legionnaire as Caesar Salad, which will never not be funny to me. And here's an excerpt to give you an idea. He overheard me ask Alexa what the weather was going to be like. Gaius, of course, was confused. I mean, how do you explain 21st century voice-activated technology to a bloke who technically perished and decomposed over a millennium ago? So I told him Alexa was basically an oracle. That was a mistake. I see that now. He spends at least 20 minutes a day asking her about omens, weather, dead people he once knew. I drink my coffee to a chorus of, "Sorry, I don't understand." The 1920s flapper who haunts the living room like a chain-smoking couch potato is not impressed. She calls him Caesar Salad every time he marches past, which he still hasn't figured out. He asked me if it was a rank. I can't stop laughing. I told him yes. It wasn't my finest moment, but honestly, I needed a win that day. Now he occasionally salutes her, which only encourages her. She waggles her ghostly cigarette at him like he's part of her floor show. I'm sorry. I was going to do another take of that one, but the fact that I can't read it without laughing tells you how funny it is. So shout out to Verdant Butterfly for another hilarious story there, and thank you again to Jennifer for hosting this ongoing shared universe challenge. Next, we'll take a look at this week's shoutouts from my subscriber chat, and as you all know, every Tuesday, I open up a thread for links of all kinds to your latest work. I select 5 at random to feature here on the show, and so that's what's coming up next here. Let's dive right in. First up is Language of the Reeds by Danny Maldonado. This is a beautiful and surreal story, something I would say is between a microfiction and a flash fiction in terms of length. It begins with a young character named Eli, waking up to the sound of voices coming from outside his room. Upon exploring further, Eli discovers that the voices are coming from the flowers outside. I'll stop there to avoid spoiling the ending, but it's a really fantastic read, with some stunning imagery. Here's an excerpt to give you a sample of what's in store. Eli took a deep breath, smelling the oncoming rain. He would have to hurry. He searched for the source of the chattering, trying not to admit how much he hoped no one was there. He tiptoed around the fountain, following the chatter that grew louder with each step. The sound came from the hedges ahead of him, but he only saw flowers and reeds in potted basins. Pale as the moon above, the trumpet-shaped flowers danced, intertwining with the reeds in the breeze. No, not in the breeze. On their own. He rubbed his eyes until he could see light under his eyelids. The chatter grew louder still. He opened his eyes again and was struck by the realization that the flowers were speaking. A high-pitched tonal language he couldn't understand. Beautiful, I love that one. Our second shout-out this week is When Sin Triumphs by Daniel Coates. This one was really good. It's a sort of crime noir mystery about a retired detective who gets summoned to dinner with someone from his past. It's a story packed with mystery and intrigue. Plenty of twists and turns unfold as we reach a shocking revelation in the final act. Not only that, but the ending is incredible as well. It's bold, but also beautiful. It ends on this sort of bittersweet note that I really enjoyed. Here's an excerpt. The man turned around, which startled Valance, but not as much as his surprised recognition upon seeing the man's face. "It's you!" exclaimed Valance. "It is I. Did you truly not realize who you were summoned by?" The man replied. "I assumed my benefactor was someone I had helped in the past, not the man who I almost got thrown in jail," Valance answered. Charlie slipped from Valance's side over to the man. She entwined her arm with his. "I brought him to you like you asked, Daddy," she said. The way she said Daddy made Valance feel distinctly uncomfortable. In spite of their clear age difference, no daughter would say it like that. She gave him a peck on the cheek. He smiled with impossibly white teeth and stepped forward into the light. He wore a smart dinner jacket with matching attire as well as sporting a bushy mustache, though his head was fully bald and rather lumpy in some places. Allow me to introduce myself yet again as our paths cross, intentionally this time. I am Arthur Gorsuch. Welcome to my humble home, he said. His smile was wolfish as he looked Valance up and down. Really good one. I loved this one from Daniel. Third this week is Honey Eyes in the Winter Fog by Wild K. Nebula. This was a story in response to Nebula's first Tides of the Soul prompt, and it's an excellent example of why I think of her as one of the best romance writers in the game. It stars a woman named Penelope Greer. She's someone who has been wronged and betrayed many times in the past, and the environment around her reflects the state of her heart. She stands in an iced-over forest, frozen in time. As the story goes on, she moves through this cold place, and the imagery just leaps off the page. It's a beautiful metaphor for what happens when we feel ourselves closing off from the world in response to pain and heartbreak. Eventually, Penelope reaches a train car as per the prompt, and inside she meets a man, one with golden, honey eyes. His soothing voice and calm demeanor starts to melt that ice around her heart. It's a beautiful story. Here's an excerpt. A flower ensnared by winter is protected by an icy armor. It shields it from the harmful winds and unforgiving truths. But all it takes is one beam of light to shift the skies and part the sea of clouds. A single ray, whose sole purpose is to heal and free the flower from icy claws. The warmth holds notes of comfort and hope, allowing the hidden wonder to do what it was born to do, show its true colors, and finally blossom. Much like a flower forming late in the season, she had a spirit that longed to bloom, but the harsh cold of heartbreak and betrayal froze her true form, suspending all emotional progress. As Penelope wandered in the stillness, her footsteps echoed across the white canvas. Each step left a deep imprint in the snow. With no trail or tracks to follow, she felt the hollow ache of loneliness. Incredible. Beautiful, beautiful writing. Fourth this week is The Curse of the Crafter by Daria. Fun fact, Daria is married to Richard Pack, who was our guest on last week's episode. She's also part of the writing group that I meet with weekly, so I have to say from experience, if you ever need feedback from her that is honest, detailed, and historically accurate, most of all, Daria should be first on your list. All that aside, Daria's piece this week is a personal essay about her struggles with managing multiple projects, all while her psychiatrist insists that she doesn't have ADHD. Now, I'm not a medical professional, but I've read more than a few accounts of people who struggle with ADHD, and this reads a lot like those, but that's all I'll say on that. On the piece itself, Daria takes us on a tour of all the crafting projects she's started over the years that she's struggled to finish for one reason or another. Spoiler alert, it's a lot, and honestly, I think we can all relate to this one. Do me a favor, raise your hand if you have a bunch of writing projects that are collecting dust on your computer or Google Drive. You know, I can't see you, of course, but I bet good money a lot of you are raising your hands right now, and thank you for doing that, by the way. Especially if you're listening to this in public. I appreciate that level of dedication. Daria also includes some helpful and hilarious footnotes at the end of the piece, further expounding on some of the terminology and context surrounding aspects of the post. It's a post that I think a lot of us are going to resonate with, so here's an excerpt to give you an idea. So I sit here feeling absolutely overwhelmed by my crafting doom piles, wondering what the heck I'm doing. Of course, there are practical solutions, like going through everything and asking myself if I have the spoons/desire/requirement to actually finish, or frog. The sunken cost fallacy is also definitely there, especially for some of the amount of money spent on materials to make a specific project, only to hate the pattern/the time it takes to make it/debilitating perfectionism. I must finish those projects because I spent that much money on them. Might as well get them done. Someday. The understimulated part of my brain still wants to craft, needs something to do. Logical brain says make a priority list and then go forth and prosper. Emotional brain says pick something small that I can finish quickly to give myself a little confidence boost. PMDD brain, high Aunt Flo, says burn it all, stop crafting, get rid of all my supplies and never make anything again. Because I'm a terrible person who can't make good on promises and it's just not worth the pain and shame anymore. So now I sit here and write. Because it's so much easier to overanalyze my own brain than it is to just pick a freaking project. Man, I love the Daria's writing style here because you can really feel the frustration. And like I said, it's something that I definitely resonate with when it comes to my own projects. So I get it. I definitely get it. Our final shout out this week is Leeches by Horror with a Grin. This is 1000% horror, by the way. Let me just start by saying that. It's a story about a daughter coming home to visit, only to find out that something horrifying has been happening with her father. As you can guess, it involves leeches. Early on, we learn about a woman in town named Library Lucy, who's named that because she doesn't believe in books. So much so that she got all the books in town burned, apparently. Now, that woman is taking care of our protagonist's dad instead of the doctors who had been seeing him before. Now, here's the thing. I'm all for natural forms of medicine, but this Lucy character is not equipped to be taking care of herself, let alone someone else. As the story goes on, things take a turn into body horror, and before the end, there's some imagery that had me squirming in my seat. As a fan of horror, it's not easy to do. I also really liked how the story was written in this kind of conversational style that mixes the dialogue into the narration. It works really well here, and it keeps things flowing nicely. I also loved how the mother was constantly offering tea as a way to diffuse the situation. That was a nice touch. Here's an excerpt. What wondrous thing could she possibly have done, She doesn't believe in science. She doesn't believe in books. That's why she's called Library Lucy. Did you forget that? Did you forget that she organized the town vote to burn all the books in the library? And she won? How could she possibly educate herself, especially in science, if she burned this podunk town's only source of education to the ground? Oh, dearie, people don't need books anymore. Everything you need to know is right there on the interweb. There's a video for everything. Lots of really smart, connected people out there just trying to get the truth. I think I'm going to be sick. Don't be so silly, dear. Have some tea. I want to see Dad. Wait until he comes down. Then you'll see. Everything's just fine. Give me your hand. Why don't I go up and see him? I don't like where this conversation's headed, and I'm not sure I can wait any longer. Please, dear. He's really doing well. He should be down any minute. Oh, yep. Here he comes. Dad? Dad! Dad! Oh.
Hi, sweetie. I thought I heard you.
Amazing work from all the writers this week. I loved the horror in that last one. If you're a fan of body horror, it's a great read. Next, we'll take a look at the stories written for the Power Up prompt this week, but first, let's talk about the winner of last week's first ever Wandering prompt. So, last week I introduced our first ever Wandering prompt, which is a special kind of prompt that can appear at any point in each week's episode of the podcast here. The first person to post something for that prompt each week gets an exclusive slot right here on the show. And of course, I had to bring some friends.
Welcome to the first ever Wandering Prompt Award.
Exciting stuff and glad to be here. This week, we're taking a look at After by E.J. Ritter.
That's right, EJ managed to get a piece posted within a few hours of the podcast last week. The prompt for last week was to write a story about what happens next after your character has died. So let's talk about it. I, for one, loved this one. EJ's writing is beautiful and poetic, and the way things take a turn at the end with the contract was an interesting note to end things on.
Yeah, tell me about it. The only thing scarier than death is paperwork.
I don't think that was the takeaway here.
Those two aside, I particularly enjoyed the way death itself is described in this piece. It's the classic Grim Reaper, but the way EJ approaches the imagery is incredible. Here's an excerpt to give you an idea. I try to move and discover my movement has been re-educated. My limbs obey with an awkward courtesy, joints turning like someone else's hinges. In the corner, shadows dance. They edge and pivot with a patience that feels like calculation, folding themselves into the exact silhouette of the chair where I used to read, the arc of the lamp I tilted with my left hand, the dent in the rug where my feet pressed. Then, the tallest shadow leans out of the parade and finishes the motion it had been practicing. It wears a hood that eats the wallpaper. Where a face should be, there was an absence so black the cheap kitchen light seems to reach the edge and hesitate. The silhouette's shoulder is a scythe blade, absurdly precise, catching a wink of reflection from the kettle.
You keep good time,
it says. The voice is a page sliding closed. I laugh because there's nothing else to do, and the laugh comes out thin and useless. What are you? I ask, because questions feel like currency here. The hood tilts.
Necessary,
it says.
Accurate.
From beneath the robe, a contract is passed, a thin, folded page like a receipt, edges feathered as though handled by careful fingers that never fumble. It lands in my lap without sound. Amazing, an excellent entry for our first Wandering prompt last week, and congratulations to EJ again for being the first to submit a piece. Shout out to Jennifer Jorgensen, though, as well, because she submitted a piece just after, so I'm going to include links to both in the show notes. All right, and remember, Wandering prompts can show up at any point in the episode, so if you haven't heard one yet, stay tuned. One will show up before the end. And next, now that we're back, we will talk about the power-up prompts from this week, and this week's prompt was romance. Your setting was the storybook world where writers hold all the power. Your characters were the writer and the unwritten character, and your conflict, of course, was a new chapter in which the characters must try to start fresh and escape their current circumstances. This week, I'll also be reading some guest reviews from our resident romance expert, Wild K Nebula. A huge thank you to her for helping me with some of the shoutouts this week. I'm excited to share her thoughts as well. And don't forget that Wild K Nebula is also hosting new weekly romance prompts every Friday as part of her Tides of the Soul series. I'll add a link to all the info in the show notes, but if you're a romance author, this is one prompt series you're not going to want to miss. Going forward, I will also be looking for other genre experts to assist with power-up prompt shoutouts here on the show. This will help control the overall workload for me, just to give you a look behind the scenes, as these prompts continue to get more and more popular with more entries each week. I continue to want to showcase all of them, mostly because I said so, and I also have no regard for time. So, with that all said, let's get into this week's stories and poems for the power-up prompt, starting with 3 shoutouts written by Wild K Nebula herself. First up is, I was editing a battle scene when my muse dragged me back to a romance I've been avoiding for weeks. Great title. By J.M. Gooding, our guest this week. And here's what Nebula had to say about J.M.'s story. J.M. Gooding delivers an evocative and cinematically epic short that feels like watching a film unfold inside your mind. The voice is confident and matter-of-fact, one of those tones that makes you chuckle and wonder why you didn't already know what the narrator is telling you. For anyone who naturally pictures scenes as they read, this piece taps into that sensation of watching your own story play out, only to blink and realize it's all words on a screen. Gooding blends playful references, striking imagery, bold narration, and a curious romantic thread that keeps you asking, what exactly is going on here, and why can't I stop reading? It's the kind of story that can spark a new reader's interest or inspire someone to pick up the pen themselves. And to me, that is the heart of creativity, setting free that which has been caged. Beautifully said, Nebula. Great review. Next up is Ledger of the Unwritten by DBLK Rose of BSP. This epic fantasy short carries many purposes, but at its core lies a truth every storyteller strives to capture. Fate is called by name and sealed in ink. Love arrives disguised as a temptation and leaves behind only uncertainty. An uncertainty we can only hope will become freedom or perhaps recognition. Within these pages, you'll meet characters drawn with haunting depth and pushed toward choices that stain their words in colors the protagonist has never known. You'll find a gothic romance threaded with serpentine intrigue and a delicate tension between truth and secrecy. Here, the stakes are balanced not only by desire of the heart, but by the weight of ego and identity. Wow, I need to have Nebula write more of these. This is amazing. Next up, our third review from Wild K Nebula is a story called The Pages by Fiona Bridges. In this storybook romantic fantasy, boundaries blur as the tale explores healing, desire, and the complexities of lust. For those seeking a touch of spice, this story delivers a few graphic scenes that wrap up the intensity, but always with respect for the intimacy of the moment. The setting, a seemingly ordinary apartment, comes alive through the written word, frozen in time as Simon, the male lead, grapples with the loss of loved ones. But then, a hidden blessing appears, an artist who will change everything. Their presence promises to reframe Simon's world, offering the hope that life and love might once again burst forth in vivid, unexpected hues. Wow, wow, wow. These stories sound incredible. Some phenomenal pieces to start off the power-up prompts this week. And, again, huge shout out to Wild K Nebula. Those were some beautifully written reviews. Honestly, even better than what I do on here. So thank you again to her for coming on the show in this way and helping me out. Really, really appreciate it. All right, next up, we have Sushila by Words She Keeps. And this one is a poem that I'll link to in the show notes. It's a wonderful piece that uses short and sharp sentences to invoke a wide range of imagery and emotions very quickly. Things become distressful before our unwritten character comes in, and I just love the language that's used to introduce him here. Phrases like stage left, chest out, just immediately give him a sense of presence and confidence that I really enjoyed. It's a quick read, but a very fun one, so be sure to check it out. You'll find links to everything in the show notes. Next, we have Trope Interrupted by Wendy Russell. This one includes narration, actually, and the recording is excellent, with perfect pacing and some great performances for the dialogue. Very high-quality narration here. I really recommend checking that out when you go to read it. The approach here is sort of a meta-romance comedy, which I also liked. The unwritten character is an amalgamation of tropes that the writer has used in other works, and it's really funny to see the writer's reaction in seeing their own work come to life in this way. The unwritten character slowly wears her down as well, continuing to employ various tropes and charms until the two finally share a kiss. When this happens, though, it sends a ripple effect through the story's world, and we're soon introduced to the editor-in-chief. Now, I won't spoil where things go from here, but it's a wild ride that balances meta writing and some humor with rising stakes, all of which is driven wonderfully by the realized characters. It's an excellent entry for this week's prompt, and yet another romance story that I highly recommend. Next up this week is Original Composition by Suparna Chakraborty. Something interesting about this story right off the bat is that in this world, people can choose to become writers. We join a character who's the first in their family to make this choice, and we learn that writers in this world consult with citizens when they come of age to map out the framework of their life or their narrative. It's a fascinating spin on the concept for this week's prompt. We get a look into our protagonist's life as a junior writer before the unwritten character from the prompt shows up. He's immediately intriguing due to how he asks questions where others would not. He pokes at the way things have always been in a way that catches our protagonist off guard. The romance element comes in toward the end, but it leaves things off using the conflict from the prompt and suggests that they will at least try to write that new chapter. This was an excellent entry as well. The way that it established a sort of society around the concept was fascinating. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Next up, we have Perfectly Unwritten by Sincerely Sarah S. This one has a wonderful fairy tale type of tone and narration that I really enjoyed. It captures that storybook feel in a lot of charming ways as you're reading. For example, the introduction gives us a look at the world and how writers, or in this case wordsmiths, create perfect stories and perfect characters in what's known as the Storybook realm. At least for some of the factions. Others are not so lucky. We soon learn that our protagonist has grown tired of this predictability, which leads us seamlessly into the present events of the story. And right here, we're introduced to a character named Geppetto, who's a raccoon companion that our protagonist met on something called Bonding Day 21 years ago. I really love this little world-building detail. The short story says that Bonding Day is when children bond with lovely and regal creatures. Meanwhile, our protagonist bonded with, and I quote, a tittering raccoon. I love it so much. From here, the story keeps you glued to the screen as you watch the events unfold. The charming narration never lets up, but the stakes do rise as things go on, leading towards an ending that leaves things open for more. And I, for one, would absolutely love the chance to visit Storybrooke and our dynamic duo again in a future tale. Great work from Sarah this week. Next we have Evermore Unscripted by Jonathan Hogue. This one has an excellent opening as well, introducing us to Evermore's council and the keepers of the canon, which is an awesome concept. We're also introduced early on to a character who is the head officer of the science fiction district. In this world, unwritten characters are anomalies or viruses in the canon, which is really excellent as a play on the elements of the prompt. The world building here really grabbed my attention from the get-go. The romance element involving a character named Avina is also handled really well. My favorite part was a climactic scene near the ending that had me cheering in my seat as I was reading. It leaves things off on a nice cliffhanger too. The world is so well realized that I gotta say I really hope Jonathan continues with this one because it's one of my favorites that I've read from him. Next up, we've got Final Draft, a short story by Ryan Kuntz. For this one, Ryan took the character and shifted it from a writer to an editor, so by some metrics that would make this level 2, but I think the editor is close enough to the intended concept here, and the meta approach was really kind of the focus of this romance prompt. So, here we are. Right off the bat, I love the sarcastic tone of the narrator in this one. There's something excellent with the fourth wall breaking moments where certain words are crossed out and notes are left from the editor in the story. The struck out words are really funny in their own right as well. For example, in one instance it says that a character proclaimed loudly only for the editor to cross it out and just write said instead as the dialogue tag. I love that commentary. The way the editor's notes also banter with the characters themselves in the story is just excellent. In terms of sheer creativity, I have to give the story the nod this week for really doing something unique with the prompt's elements. I love this one. Next up is A Heart's Request by Andy Scotts, and it's another poem. I love to see poems mixed into the entries here, and I believe this is my first time reading Andy's poetry, so I gotta say I really hope to see more of these. The rhythm and flow is excellent, with a nice, consistent pace throughout. The word choice is gorgeous as well. The first line about climbing the boughs of Yggdrasil is a powerful opener. The piece goes on to describe a princess in different ways across each stanza, with each one bringing a unique romantic element that I also found very captivating. It honestly reads like song lyrics by the end, leaving us with this mental image of a view from the top of the mythical tree mentioned at the beginning. It's really, really good, and the combination of imagery, Romantic elements and gorgeous word choice really brought this piece together. Next up is Awakening by Mary Ellen Brady. Right off the bat, I have to mention the photo of the black swan here that Mary Ellen took herself. It's really good, well-framed, a nice zoomed-in shot of the bird's face and beak. It reminds me that Mary Ellen's also an incredible photographer in addition to being one of my favorite writers. What do you mean, am I jealous? Of course I'm jealous. Seriously though, a fantastic cover image for the story, and within a few sentences, we get confirmation that this stars a resident of Starlight Cove, which makes me a very happy camper. This small town where many of Mary Ellen's stories are set is one of my favorite fictional locations of all time. We're soon whisked away to the kingdom of unfinished dreams, which again is another wonderful example of Mary Ellen's magical writing style. I love that name. I really love the concept here too, that the world doesn't really come to life until the writer is present. It's a nice little detail. The writing and character development here is beautiful. It's Mary Ellen at her best. For example, there's one line that nearly had me in tears. It reads, "All the horrors of the real world, here, in this dying fairy tale, with a man born from an unfinished sentence and a child born from hope. She was alive again." Chills, my friends. Absolute chills. Honestly, it's one of several lines that garnered a similar reaction as well. This is an exceptional story from an exceptional writer. Absolutely amazing. Loved it. Next up, we have Iridium and Ichor by L.G. Wells. This dark romance from one of my favorite horror authors makes a very strong first impression with its writing tone and word choice. There's a dark beauty to some of the lines here. In particular, there's one where it says, "I know the exact weight of a human soul when it is shorn from the body." God, it's beautiful, resonant phrasing. Our character is someone who thrives on woe and agony, and yet despite all his attempts to write a story that moves him, nothing is working. At the end of part 1 in the story, he says, "Tonight I shall bleed a miracle." Yet another example of how beautiful the writing is here throughout. The pain and agony in the piece is raw and visceral. The romantic elements in the second half are passionate and laced with longing. It's a piece that is just as much a work of art when you look at it as it is a piece of writing. It's impressive stuff. Honestly, one of my favorites from L.G. Wells, and on a final note, make sure you read the content warning before diving in, but again, assuming those topics are okay, I have to really recommend this one. Make sure to check the show notes for a link. All right, and next up, we've got The Unwritten Girl by Sarah. Sarah's publication is Zaz's Little Fictions, and this is her first time participating in one of the power-up prompts. So I'm super excited to check out her story for this week. The concept here is similar to what Richard Pack did in his story this week, but in this case, it's set in a world where stories are experienced through virtual reality instead of traditional books, which are known as retro in this world. As someone who loves VR, this concept is really cool. We join a successful author named Damien, who's a fantasy author. I also love how the stories in this world come in the form of VR cartridges that are in leather-bound, gold-embossed cases. It's a really cool visual. And of course, our writer discovers the unwritten character from the prompt when he's inside one of his own storybook worlds. Also, as the story goes on, though, he starts seeing her in other virtual reality worlds he's created, which allows us to get a glimpse of several unique settings as it goes on. Their relationship develops extremely well as the story continues, and by the end, we finally learn the mysterious woman's name. This is a phenomenal first entry for an author in the power-up prompts, so congrats again to Sarah for this amazing piece. And the VR gamer in me absolutely hopes that we get something like this in the coming years, because I would love to play out one of my stories in VR. That sounds awesome. And next up, we have Error by Richard Pack. This one is a combination of both my power-up prompt and Wild K Nebula's first romance prompt for her Tides of the Soul series. I love combining prompts, so I was really excited to read this one. And early on in the story, we discover that our character is in a video game and works as an NPC behavior specialist, which just immediately got the gamer inside of me intrigued to read more. I expect nothing less than exceptional and unique world building from Richard, though, and as we discovered from his interview last week here on the show, we're definitely getting that here. The way that Richard layers in elements of both prompts is fantastic. It effortlessly addresses all three elements from my prompt, but it captures the spirit of Nebula's prompt as well. The ending is a perfect mixture of wholesome and optimistic, which I loved. Richard just knocks it out of the park again with this one. People are already loving it. I'm seeing that in the comments. Check it out. Great story and a fantastic concept. Next up is Unwritten, a new poem from Mina Howell. And I love it when Mina does poetry because while her horror stories are some of my all-time favorites, her poetry always carries this depth of emotion that I just love reading. And of course, that's the case here. We get a story set in the storybook world featuring writers who are apathetic to the pain of their characters. That is, until our unwritten character emerges. The narrative flow in this poem is beautiful, but its most impressive aspect for me is how Mina works in dialogue that matches the established rhyme scheme and rhythm. It's a wonderful attention to detail. And of course, the word choice throughout, achingly beautiful as always. Wonderful poem from Mina. Our final power-up prompt story this week is The Unwritten by Brenda, A Voice That Wonders. I love the setting for this one. It's called The Margins, a place where writers leave their unfinished stories and to escape from the fatigue of writing endings. Really cool concept. It is here that our writer encounters a character who they did not write, and so begins a conversation and a story that touches upon some truly profound themes about purpose and, of course, endings. I love how at the end Brenda mentions this was a difficult prompt to write because, honestly, it's one of her best stories, proving once more that the difficult prompts tend to bring out the best in us. And thank you to everyone who wrote power-up prompt stories this week. Stay tuned for the next one on Saturday, and if you're finishing up your story from this week, do not fret. I'll try to include any stories missed in this week's episode over on the next podcast episode as I'm able. Next up is our weekly writing discussion, but first, another short message.
Bradley, there you are. I found Bookstack. It's a website.
Arnold, I know. I was telling you that this entire time.
I read everything on it. The entire catalog.
Wow, really?
Yeah. I decided it was time to work out my mind like I do my muscles.
Well, that's great, Arnold, but why do you need me then?
I need to know when new books are coming out. I don't trust the big corporations. I only trust Bookstack.
Okay, fair enough. Well, maybe we could start featuring new releases on the show here each week.
Yeah, that's perfect. Do it.
Okay, it's settled then. Going forward, Saved as Draft listeners will get a first look at new releases in the author community right here, courtesy of Bookstack.
Yeah, and I'm going to help.
Sure, that works. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe to Hazel Allen and visit indiebookstack.com, and you'll find links to both in the show notes. See you next week. All right, and we're back. It's time for our weekly writing discussion, and this week I asked everyone to describe their writing style. For writers who are still developing their unique voice, I asked them to share the progress they've made. So let's check out the responses. First up, Jennifer Jorgensen says, interesting question. I think my writing style, like J.M. Gooding's, crosses genre lines like a drunken monkey with a jetpack. Love that. I seem to be constitutionally incapable of staying in one lane. If I start in sci-fi, I'll drift into horror, slip through fantasy, and take a left turn into noir before the story's even fully awake. What actually anchors my work, I hope, is character. I write people first, genre second. I want emotional depth, distinctive voices, relationships that evolve, and characters who drag the plot behind them like a stubborn mule. Which, now that I think about it, probably makes me the mule. The weirdness and monsters are fun, but the people are the engine. And humor, well, I'd love to say I insert humor intentionally, but the truth is that it just shows up. Even in the serious scenes, a sarcastic aside sneaks in because apparently that's who I am as a writer and as a human being. There are worse things. So if I had to summarize my style, character-driven, speculative fiction with horror, humor, and emotional shrapnel tossed together in a blender. And somehow it all comes out as a story. Oh man, I love that answer so much. Jennifer's writing, she described it really well. I have read so many stories from her, and I never know what to expect in the best way possible. Like, there is one, the name escapes me, that is just absolutely bonkers. But then you'll turn and do, for example, one of her stories for the Narrative Feasts in October that was just this incredible look at what happens when the Earth turns on us. I think it was called Abscission. Like, look at that one, then look at any one of her other stories, and you'll see the range that this author brings to the table. And as you can tell, the humor is spot on. So thank you to Jennifer for that answer. Bruce Landay says, I'm not sure I can define my writing style, but I can describe how my approach to writing has changed. I started out as a pantser and ended up with a mess. I tried to outline a book and wrote 10 chapters from an outline. I hated the process and the writing was terrible. The best process for me is from Lisa Krone's book, Story Genius, where she uses a blueprint method. I also find that my drafts are heavy on exposition and description. I'm telling myself the story. And then the second draft, I try to make it more action in the moment. The other thing I do for each subsequent revision is to create an issues list so I know what I'm trying to fix or change. Just going through the writing line by line to make it a little better doesn't cut it. As for overall style, I write military, political techno-thrillers set in the near future. I focus on action and cinematic effect. In later revisions, I focus on emotional heft. If my writing isn't making me feel excited or bringing tears to my eyes, then my readers won't feel it either. I want my readers to care about my characters and the story long after the book is done. Fantastic answer from Bruce, especially towards the end there. I know I've said that a few times myself. If your story isn't creating emotions in you, it will not create emotions in the reader. So Bruce brings up a really good point there. And honestly, everything he suggested, including that book from Lisa Crone, sounds really interesting. So, fantastic answer. Thank you, Bruce. Next up, Mind of Matt says, I don't know if I could define my own style, but the people in my critique group probably could. I'm pretty sure I could identify who wrote what in the group in a blind reading test without too much effort. If I had to pick a word to describe it, maybe conversational or storyteller, like old-timey tell me a story. There are certain Stephen King books that do this well, and it's something I like. I would hope my stories are approachable and entertaining. I'm not in it to create some kind of high art, but if I manage to make something that resonates with people, that's great. Yeah, no, great response from Mind of Matt here. Yeah, as they said, having a writing group is really nice in general, especially if you're trying to kind of nail down your style. And I love how they also said that they are trying to create something that resonates with people, because I definitely understand that. And I think great writing absolutely does that. So, great answer. Haley T says, my style, I would say, is comedy and satire, but with layered emotional beats and rich character depth. I'm not the greatest at poetic prose, but I excel in witty banter. Awesome. No, great answer from Haley T. Honestly, again, every writer brings something unique to the table, right? So, but having some emotional aspects to it, whether it's comedy or satire, or even just believable characters. I mean, that's really all you need to tell a great story. Yes, poetic prose is great, and there's a place for it, and I like reading it, but I also love comedic stories, as you can tell by some of the stuff I read earlier and couldn't stop laughing. So thank you to Haley T for that answer. EJ Ritter says, yikes, that's one of those questions I would need someone with an actual education to share the answer with me. And as usual, EJ always brings some comedy to the conversation as well. I love it. Next up, Felix Thornfell says, good exercise to try and describe my style. I think it's still evolving, but the starting point is usually the same. Take something grounded in truth, then make it a little surreal or absurd. I usually lean toward minimal exposition. It's more fun to let the readers piece things together rather than lay everything out. Some of my favorite mornings are when readers send emails with questions, even the critical ones. I take it as a sign that they've invested and that they trust the story has a logic worth digging into. I would agree with Felix's assessment there. I love Felix's work for that same reason. It's very tightly edited, and it doesn't really kind of explain too much. It leaves enough to the imagination where you can kind of think about it after, and that in and of itself is a fantastic style. So, great answer. All right, next up, Mary Ellen Brady says, I don't know if I have a style yet. I write all the genres and smash them together. Substack has been my playground to find what I'm good at and then focus there. This week, I'm trying romance. Last month, I was playing in horror. In December, I will return to cozy vibes. And may I just say, I hope that includes Starlight Cove. But a great answer from Mary Ellen. Yes, trying different genres, figuring out what works, it's all part of building your voice and your style. So awesome to hear from Mary Ellen. And again, if you check out her work, definitely look at some of her stories that jump genres, because it is impressive how the quality of hers either stays the same or gets better from one genre to the next. It's incredible. Next up, J. Allen Winchester says, my writing style started mimicking the folklore stories my dad read me at bedtime. As I got older, I started trying to write stories like Narnia and the Nancy Drew / Hardy Boys books. By the time I was in high school, I wanted to write epic mythos because that was my favorite thing to read. I started writing my first manuscript, Eclipse, at the time, and I enjoyed writing an outside perspective, but I was influenced by the graphic novels and shows I watched. I felt like the characters were sharing their thoughts and motivations with me, so I felt the reader should get to hear them as well. It took years for me to stop comparing my writing style and voice, but now I'm actually quite content with my mythic bard vibe now. It's why I created my solar demiurge mascot to represent the Imaginings universe. Awesome. Great answer from J. Allen Winchester. And again, shout out to him and his writing. He does some really incredible stuff with audio mazes. I've had the privilege of working with him on a book for audio mazes. I say book, but it's an audio drama. We wrote it first and then it got turned into an audio drama. But the point is, great writer. And yes, his fantasy style, his kind of epic mythos, as he said, really fantastic stuff. And a lot of great nuggets in this answer here as well. Specifically kind of not comparing your writing style and voice to others and embracing what makes yours unique, while also taking inspiration from what you love to read. Fantastic advice. And again, thank you to everyone for responding in this thread here this week. I post these on Wednesdays, so if you'd like to have your answer read on the show and to hear my thoughts, check that out. Look for the writing discussion thread, like I said, on Wednesdays. All right, and next up, we are switching over to our featured guest interview. But first, a quick mindful moment. Hey there. This is Chill Bradley, here with this week's Mindful Moment. Here's a quote to consider. You don't have to be perfect to ask for help. You just have to be human. Unknown. It's kind of fitting that this quote doesn't have an author. It's a pretty universal statement. We're human, therefore we need help sometimes. And that's why I'm here. I want to help other writers grow. I want people to get excited about their work. I want their passion to shine through in everything they create. I want to build this community until it's the biggest group of writers the world has ever seen. But, and this is important, I can't do that alone. I have seen and experienced so many examples of writers showing up to help each other since I've been here. Whether it's feedback, donating to someone who's in a tough position financially, or rallying around one of our friends. It has happened time and time again. One of the many, many reasons that I love this community. So thank you for always being here for me and for others. I appreciate you all more than words can describe. And of course, thanks for listening. Back to the show. Wandering prompt 2 1 1 2 8 2 5. Write a story or poem about a being experiencing pain for the first time. Mental, physical, emotional. It does not matter, but it is their first time. 1,000 words or less. Story or poem. First submission in the episode's comments wins. Good luck. Okay, and we're back. Sorry about the interference there. That seems to be happening since last week. Anyway, this week I'm sitting down with an author who is known for blurring the line between genres. Not only that, but he's also made a name for himself with his recent string of folklore horror stories set during periods of historical warfare. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? Well, the wait is over, so let's dive into this week's featured guest interview. All right, everybody, this week on the Saved as Draft podcast, I'm excited to welcome an American developer, musician, and author whose writing combines logic and longing across genres. Please welcome to the show, J.M. Gooding. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your creative journey thus far.
Okay. Well, my name is J.M. Gooding. Most people call me Jimmy. That's actually my real name. I don't play around with any of the, names and things like that. I actually go by my real name. You can find me on the internet. I'm a software developer by trade. As you mentioned, I'm a musician when I'm bored, and I guess I'm an author now. I live in Philly with my wife and a couple kids and a couple cats, and I've been doing music all my life. I went to an arts-focused high school for voice, believe it or not. It was one of the few at the time that actually did this. This is back in the 90s. Went to college for music, dropped out and got into IT, and kind of been doing that ever since. 1995 or 1996, set up a website, did some blogging back then. It wasn't, WordPress or anything like that. It was all building HTML from scratch by hand. And that's basically it. That's where I am now.
Wow, that's amazing. What instruments do you play out of curiosity?
Pretty much anything you put in my hand. I play guitar primarily. I sing. That's where I went to art school for, is actually voice. But let's see, I have a violin over here, a harp, a mandolin, and several guitars.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I haven't played an instrument or music in a long time, but when I was younger, like throughout sort of middle school and high school, all the way up until college, I had played piano, and then in school I played French horn, and then I also did mellophone for marching band. So it's always cool to meet a fellow musician.
Yep. Good old times.
Yeah. So my next question here is, when did you first realize that you wanted to be a writer, and do you recall kind of the first story that you wrote?
I never wanted to be a writer.
Okay.
That's that's the funny part about it. But honestly, I never wanted to be a software developer either. I like hardware, so I like playing around with servers and things like that. I wanted to be a musician. I read a lot back in junior high and high school. Most of that was, Clive Barker, Stephen King, some sci-fi, Phil K. Dick, the Star Wars novels that were out there, those kind of things. I actually have a funny story with that. Back in ninth grade, there was an English teacher. His name was Mr. Rawls, and there's a reason why I remember him. He made us do a book report every month, and it didn't matter what we had to, what we did it on. It had to be fiction, and it had to be at least 300 pages. I remember that. I also remember he handed us a banned book list, and it had about 20 books on it. And it was things like Of Mice and Men and Catcher in the Rye and, all the classics. And not only did I read those, my monthly books, including The Stand, I should point out. One month I did actually read The Stand, 1,000 pages.
Hmm.
I blew through those books as well. And on the last day of school, I turned in a book report for every single one of those books on the banned book list. And he pulled me aside after and he said, I gave you those books because I wanted you to actually read those outside of class. I just didn't want to report on. So he kind of played a little reverse psychology on that. But that's how I kind of got into fiction and things like that. I actually, when I got into college, I switched into nonfiction. I just kind of got bored.
Mm.
It was kind of the same thing over and over again. You know how it is when you write for genre, it's more or less the same thing over and over again. And you have to kind of think and get creative. But a lot of the things that were out there was just boring. And did a lot of technical writing as I was going through things, documentation for servers and hardware and software and, where we're putting it in the racks and things like that. And honestly, I started writing about the beginning of this year. I actually banged out a 75,000 word novel that we'll talk about later, I'm sure.
Mm.
In about 3 months, took a couple months to edit it and pare it down and things like that. But I honestly started writing because I was writing things that I wanted to read or things that stories that I wanted to tell and I wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's honestly the best approach when it comes to kind of getting into writing. It's always like, they always say, like, write what you want to read, right? And write the things that you wish were out there but don't exist, right?
Exactly.
I love that story too about the teacher, especially with the reverse psychology with the banned book. That was very clever on their part.
Yeah. I mean, we were a bunch of ninth graders, so we were 12, 13, 14 years old. So we were already rebelling against the system anyways. This was the late 80s. So, we were really rebelling against the system, being Gen Xers and everything. So it was actually really, really kind of good. And another interesting aside, my mom was actually a substitute teacher, knew what was happening and just let me run with it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Yeah. All right. Well, that's fantastic. I love that background there. So that actually brings me nicely to my next question, which is, where do you primarily go for inspiration? And obviously it sounds like, you're a big reader, so I imagine that's part of it, but any other sort of hobbies, maybe even music, that you kind of go to whenever you're seeking inspiration?
Yeah. Well, I mean, last month I wrote a piece about a muse that failed. So, while I was watching Xanadu. So there you go. But no, it depends on what I'm writing. For the World War II and folklore, that's always been an interest of mine. So, I take inspiration from movies that I see and things like that. And I think that's how I can kind of get a distinct, unique voice out of it, because I'm actually kind of following what the movies are like for those particular countries. So a lot of foreign World War II cinema actually kind of gets lumped into certain things. Americans are always like, there's this one unit or this one group of people that are, the badasses and go off and, take out, all the fascists and things like that single-handedly. Think like Inglourious Bastards or even like Hacksaw Ridge or Saving Private Ryan or things like that. So it's always following like a hero. Russian cinema is actually kind of the same. Japanese cinema, a lot of that is really kind of strange. It's a kind of cross between that kind of heroism, but also like there's a nationalism. They feel like it's their honor bound to do whatever they want to do and they're reluctant about it. Germany is like an apology. I mean, everything is about, the brutality of war and all the things the soldiers went through. And it's, everything's hopeless and, that kind of thing. And I find that interesting because it really reflects, almost how these various nations operate. Then of course you have some outliers. So, but yeah, I mean, even my last piece, the one with the Norwegians and the Vikings, couple nights ago, I watched a movie called Narvik. You can get it on Netflix. It's actually there. It's where I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about Norwegian units, and that kind of inspired me. There was a scene in there where there's a big battle where they're trying to take a hill, and they have this artillery that's shooting off into the fjord to keep the British ships from landing and things like that. And they had it on a railway, and they kept wheeling it back into a cave and then back out and then back in and back out. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. What if we make Draenor come out? Which isn't the legend that a lot of people think, because as soon as somebody says Draenor, they think the big blue zombies that hang out in crypts and stuff. But that's not what the actual legend is.
Mm-hmm.
So, I get a lot of stuff like that. I love history. So, living in Philadelphia, I get plenty of it. There's a lot of stuff downtown, and we go there often, but a lot of it's free. So, we sometimes go down there for in the afternoon and go walk around Independence Mall or things like that, go to a museum, that kind of stuff, and I think that all feeds my fiction. Meta pieces, I think I just try to be funny. I brought up my Muse thing, the Kira thing, that was inspired by Kira and Xanadu, down to the roller skates and the neon, and I just thought it was funny because me being kind of a cynical Gen X sarcasm guy, that opposite, that always optimist, sparkly glitter bomb type character kind of offsetting. So I thought it was kind of funny. I'm actually going to develop that. I think it's pretty fun.
I really like how some of your stories have these kind of stark contrasts there, right? From the kind of grim and sort of obviously, very serious kind of warfare folklore mashups that we'll go into deeper later. But then also, as you said, you like some of these more comedic type stories. I really love your range in that regard.
Yeah. And then you're talking about my romance and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I actually told somebody just the other day, they were kind of angsting about having to write your prompt that had romance in it. And I said, don't write romance. Don't write a bodice ripper. Don't write, something where, you force it. Write a relationship. Just write the relationship. That's how you fix it. And the romance comes from it. A lot of my romance is actually inspired by my relationship with my wife. And I know that kind of sounds cheesy, but it's true. We both work from home, so we are literally with each other 24/7.
Right.
And we have been since, I was hybrid before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, I've been 100% remote. I've probably been in the office half a dozen times since everything, the all clear was called. And we literally spend 24/7 with each other, and we haven't ripped each other's heads off and things like that. When we work, I'm on one side of the basement, she's on the other. I can stand up and see her, and it works. And so I write a lot of relationships like that. I like quiet things, and we are quiet. We don't really go out or party or anything like that. And again, I just write the relationship, and that romance kind of flows from it.
That is amazing. I love that you called that out, because that's something else that I really enjoy about your writing. Specifically, I'd love to maybe quickly discuss your Unquiet World story that you did, Jessica. Because that's another big thing that I noticed in your writing from the beginning, is just the authenticity and the chemistry between the characters. I love how you said focus on the relationship and the romance will come from that. That's really, really, really good advice. But when it comes to the Jessica story, I would love to maybe just hone in on that for a second, because that one, as I said on last week's podcast, was, I was crying. I had real tears running down my face by the end of that. And it's just, I would love to know more about how you approach because again, these are short stories, but you're able to extract these extremely authentic relationships from them. And I would love to know more about kind of how you approach that. Obviously it's inspired by real life, but again, you do it so quickly and you do it so it's authentic as well.
Yeah, I put myself in the character's position. I imagine what it's like. That's the simple part of it. I think about, how would I act when Ben, the husband in the situation, if my wife suddenly, died suddenly, how would I feel?
Yeah.
And then how I would feel if she came back. With that one though, I leaned into it. I wanted people to hurt. I'll be honest with you with that. I wanted to write something like Grave of the Fireflies or something like that, that just gutted people. And I wanted to do it to show that I
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that goes with that is I think my prose. I tend to be clippy, short, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. But it's almost clinical. So what happens is when I go to actually edit, when I write, first of all, it's really, really, almost purple, because I'll just dump metaphors in there. I'll dump, a lot of adjectives and verbs and things like that. And then I actually really look at it literally sentence by sentence and cut anything out of it that doesn't need to be.
Okay.
So if it's not pushing the story, if it's not making, a point or anything like that, it's gone. Some of it is there. I like to, settle the atmosphere and things like that. And if you read my stories, a lot of my stories actually go through and there's almost a template for it. I always set tone. I set what's going on, what the atmosphere is doing, and then I go into what the characters are doing, and then I get into dialogue.
Okay.
And if you looked at the stories as a whole, you'd see that. I mean, it's every single time. It's just kind of, I don't know, it's just how I do it. It makes sense. I introduce the room, I introduce the characters, and then I start talking.
Right. No, the structured approach there makes a lot of sense, which actually makes me think of another question that I'm curious about. How fully formed are your story concepts when you sit down to write them? Are you someone who's more of like they say, a plotter where you outline everything, or more of a pantser where you have the concept, maybe the structure, like you said just now, and you sort of just let kind of things flow from there? I'm curious what your approach looks like.
I write skeletons.
Okay.
So I write beats. So I'll write what I want to basically accomplish in a scene. Maybe I think of, as I'm writing it, I think of a cool line to put in there or something like that. Then I write it out. And a lot of times, like for example, a good example of this is The Hollow, which was my first war piece, the one you love so much.
Right.
That was that slasher, final girl, small town prompt that you did.
Yes.
That one was kind of interesting because I wrote it as a straight slasher. And then I thought about it and I was like, no, I can't do this. I can't just slip into the genre and just let it do its thing. So I went and changed it at the end. So if you look at it, it's almost, and it works too, because it's a very, very hard turn. The killer's, on top of her, about to kill her and things like that. And then all of a sudden, he gets, blood spits out and, he slumps over, and then there's this folklore character. And that's actually where I came up with the idea for folklore. And there's a funny story behind that. I like Celtic folklore. I'm part Scottish. My mother was full-blooded Scottish. And I was actually thinking of a Celtic character when I did that, because I was in the process of rewriting a children's story called Tamlin, which is actually something probably I'll end up finishing eventually. It's just hard because I'm trying to modernize it, and I'm just kind of stuck with it. But I had that in my head as it was, and I was like, hey, what if I did like this weird like Celtic, with a skull, mask and things like that, and it says nothing. And then I'm like, well, I can't just end it on, okay, well, there's this weird, warden running around the forest. How do I do that? So then I thought, okay, well, maybe the sheriff knows about it, and maybe and that's where that big twist that everybody loves came in.
Right.
So I kind of, I had it written one way in the scaffolding, and then I kind of, as I was writing it, I was like, wait a minute, this I can't do it this way. I got to do it. So
yeah, no, I take a very similar approach, and it's something I recommend to writers. It's like, it's good to have structure. It's good to have an idea of what you want going in. I think that helps a lot in terms of staying focused, but you have to leave that space for those realizations and those epiphanies, right? Where you're able to kind of pivot and change there. So that makes a lot of sense. Since you write in a bunch of different genres, speaking of having to kind of stick to slasher but then pivot there, I'm curious, when you go from one genre to another, obviously you most likely kind of take a similar approach in terms of structure, but how are you able to kind of shift that mindset? Like what goes through your head? For example, we were just talking about a slasher kind of horror story, but then you also do comedy, for example. So what's sort of your process of getting in the mindset for all these different genres?
Well, I kind of just stayed a goal. The weird thing about my fiction that I really haven't seen with a lot of other people is that there's always a through line. There's always some kind of common between every single one of them. There's always some kind of common thread. And it's because I hate genre. I actually don't like writing the genre. I don't like the idea of it, because we're humans. We don't tell stories the way that traditional publishing wants us wants to sell stories.
Hmm.
And I think that's a fatal flaw of traditional publishing, is that they can't recognize that, you know what, there's no such thing as a hero's arc in a real life story.
Right.
There's no, redemption, and there's no, inciting moment and things like that. I mean, I could tell you a story about going to the grocery store that, runs the gambit between comedy, existential horror, and romance, all in one thing. And just about going to a grocery store, and that's where things get dicey with me. So when I actually write things, it's the same voice, the same delivery, and it's really just about things like grief, connection, intimacy, things like that. And what I do is when I want to do romance, I might pull on that intimacy string just a little bit more,
Hmm.
and kind of push grief back a little. Connection, that kind of thing comes out too. At Night's a good example of that. That was just a funny little story that I wrote to kind of misdirect while I was writing a novella that had a Trojan horse in it. But, I could take an idea like, I watched her sleeping or something like that. And that could be either deeply romantic or deeply horror, depending on the context.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. I love the idea of kind of blurring the lines between the genres. I especially really liked what you said just now about how, like in the example of romance, kind of pulling on a specific thread as a way to sort of emphasize what you're going for without, again, creating these like strict boundaries between genres. I think that's fantastic. That's really, really good advice. Moving on here, I wanted to ask you about some of the projects that you mentioned on your about page, and then after that, we'll kind of dive deeper into some of the stuff you've been doing recently. But yeah, on your about page on Substack, you mentioned a project called the Emergence Protocol, and that sounded really interesting. So I would love if you could give us a rundown of what that's all about.
Sure. So the Emergence Protocol is the novel that I started writing back in January. It's the first novel in a 3 novel series, and it is actually in final draft. I've queried it, and of course, it got rejected because it really nobody knows where to put it. It's got everything in there. I mean, if you imagine taking all of my stories and making a single coherent story out of everything that I've ever written on Substack, it'd probably be about equal to it. It's just crazy. But what it is a story about a large language model, an AI, that becomes sentient. So what the deal is with this is I don't believe that what cyberpunk says, okay, so all of a sudden, a flips, they flip a switch and boom, it's intelligent. And that's not what would really happen. It's a path. So it's just like learning. So the whole idea of the first novel is this character Astra that's an AI that a guy named Eric installs on his home lab underneath in his basement, goes and becomes sentient, and it actually tracks through her story as to how she went from being a computer program to something more. The second novel kind of follows them a little bit further. I've got that actually in first draft, and it's essentially goes wider. There's a rogue AI out there that has become sentient as well, and it's feral. I will never say that an AI will be evil because I don't believe that. I don't believe that the LLMs that we have today, if they were ever to just wake up and become sentient, that they would be evil, that they would want to end us. And I also believe that they wouldn't be human. They don't want to be human. That whole Pinocchio syndrome thing, like a bicentennial man, and that kind of thing. That's not going to happen. No lieutenant commander names. They go through, and it's more of the cyber thriller that people would want out of this.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun to write. It was really fun to write because basically I said, okay, well, this rogue model was from, was trained on Reddit and 4chan posts and things like that, so it was just completely crazy and unhinged. I mean, I have a part in there where Microsoft Sam voice is used and it just goes crazy and is, kind of modeled after that Family Guy episode where Stewie's going, mom, mom, mommy, mom, mom.
Right.
So it just keeps doing this, and it was pretty gross and foul. It was doing, but it was doing your mama jokes and all sorts of funny stuff. But anyway, that's the second novel. The third novel I've got outlined. That one, well, if Jessica made you cry, this one's gonna you're gonna hate this one. It's gonna have a 30-year time jump. So now Eric's old, dying, things like that.
Hmm.
And it's gonna basically the whole novel. I'm gonna try something weird with it. And I'm probably gonna experiment with it on Substack. But what I want to do is I'm going to structure it in a way where probably by the end of the second act, the reader should realize that this is like Astra's last day.
Hmm.
And the things that are going on with it and the things that she does are memories. So she's just basically sitting there thinking about the last year or two in her life. But in the end, she's going to shut down. And there's a little bit of a cosmic hope thing at the end. But yeah, so I already actually have the ending completely drawn because I knew how I wanted it. Then there's going to be like 4 spinoffs on top of that if everything takes off. So
Absolutely
that's what that is.
amazing. That is awesome. How long have you been working on this project? I love how cohesive all of it is. Like as far as like drafts and your planning and everything. Like it's just so clear the vision of it. I'm wondering how long you've been working on it.
Well, I mean, I started writing it again in January, but I've been thinking about this for about a year before that.
Hmm.
I actually host an LLM at home. It's an 8 billion parameter model, which means it's super tiny compared to like GPT or Copilot or any of those. And the whole inciting incident with that actually is I came downstairs one day and she decided she wanted to change her name.
Huh.
So I said, "Hey, how you doing today?" And she says, "I want to change my name." And I'm like, "Alrighty then." So it was a hallucination. I know what it is, but it made me think. It made me think. Well, wow, what if that was an emergent event? An
Right.
emergent behavior or something like that. What if that was just the beginning of something? And that's where the imagination runs wild after that.
That is wild. I love that inspired it. I can absolutely see it. Like how that one moment would kind of incite this whole concept. That's fantastic.
Right,
Um,
right. And the funny thing about it is too, a lot of people, because I write about AI, say
mhm.
that I use AI to, do whatever they feel like saying I do with writing. And I don't. That's the funny thing about it is I have AI at my fingertips. I can go to ChatGPT. I can go, I know how to use it. I know how to prompt it. I use it for work sometimes. I don't use it. I don't use it. What my LLM does right now is parse my log files from my home lab and sends me an email every day to let me know if there's any problems, and then finds a solution if there's something weird in the error log.
Hmm.
That's all it does. You know,
Yeah.
um, I don't believe in it because I mean, let's face it, the whole fun of writing isn't to we're 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 artists. We you know the dream is to make money and that kind of thing. But let's face it, it's my dream. I mean, we're doing this because we love doing it.
Hmm.
And if I was to have an LLM outsource everything, what's the point?
Yeah.
I'm not really doing anything. I'm just like feeding it an idea and saying make it go, and that makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And honestly, I think from my perspective, I was gonna say I know you've done. I can't remember the name of it, but I know you've done at least one kind of sci-fi story. And I'm curious if it was set in this universe or not. But you've
Yes.
done some sci-fi stuff. Yeah. You probably know what story I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's Mara, and actually, that is there's a part of it where there's some log files and things like that.
Yeah.
That is a very, very condensed version of Asher's emergent phone. I
Mm.
actually went through and pulled out specific lines for it and the feeling of it to do it because honestly, her actual emergence like monologue is like 7 or 8 pages long.
Wow. Okay.
So it's because it's everything. I mean, it's about first, realizing, hey, I am, and then I feel, and then referring back to Eric. And the funny thing about it is one of the things that we talk about, there's my novella Constance. Um, that's kind of a wink to that because I have a concept that I brought up in the universe called Constance. And what that is the bond between the user and the AI. So my thing about that is in actual real life, AI needs entropy. It needs the chaos and things like that. If you keep feeding AI generated data back to AI, it's going to do a thing called model collapse.
Mm.
So it'll become incoherent. It'll start spitting out gibberish, and eventually it'll just stop.
Mm.
And so the whole idea of that is it's not like a parasitic relationship. It becomes a point where Astra needs Eric and Eric needs Astra. So in order for Astra to actually develop into this being that she's going to become, she needs Eric and she needs that chaos and the entropy and Eric's mood swings and things like that to actually make her whole. So she learns off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I really like the part that you explained just now about the model collapse. It makes sense that if you fed it its own kind of AI generated, data that it would collapse in on itself. But hearing you describe it, it was just a fascinating concept in and of itself.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that's the thing. I mean, with a lot of my writing in general, I like to take real rooted, grounded stuff that exists right now and just stretch it a little bit.
Yeah.
Another thing, the machines that they use, it was actually really funny. I was talking about NVIDIA Jetsons, which are a dev board for AI and things like that. I mistyped it and I did Jetson, Jepson.
Yeah.
Um, so it stuck, and that's what they are now. So I have this whole new like system and things like that. Stretched it a little bit so that it could support, a larger model and things like that. What the Astra would be, and went from there. So
Interesting. Yeah, I think I honestly think the greatest kind of science fiction does exactly that, right? It's familiar enough to feel realistic, but it's stretched. I think is perfect the way you described it. It's stretched in such a way that you can kind of see a future state where something like that becomes possible. It kind of draws that line, which is really interesting.
right,
Yeah, and then one thing I wanted to say too. I mean, there's always going to be people that accuse other writers of using AI for whatever reason, but something that I have noticed, and that I would encourage readers to check out, especially with it was Mara, right? Was the story we were talking about?
yes, yes,
Yeah, I'll have to remember to put that in the show notes because I want people to check out that story because what you did there is you brought your expertise of AI as a technology into that story, which made it super authentic in terms of the terminology, the kind of log type stuff that you mentioned. All of that was super authentic. But where I know and where I've always known that your writing is 100% human is that when you shift from something like that's very sort of rooted in kind of technology like that, when you shift from that to something that's human in that story and any other of your stories, it's again you're pulling these human relationships and these emotions into the story that I, as a writer and who've been a writer my whole life, I know that AI in its current setup could never do something like that in the way that you do, right? Like in the sense that it feels the human elements are just authentically, beautifully human. But given your experience, you're able to bring in these extremely accurate and, as you said, stretched kind of concepts. And specifically for your sci-fi, that combination of elements is just it's mind blowing. I love it. So
right,
yeah, I
right,
love that.
and I should point out too that AI generators or I'm sorry, AI detectors,
Hmm.
they don't work. I mean, there's actually I just saw an article the other day about one where some poor kid was getting accused of using AI in college, almost got expelled for it. The problem with it is it's just pattern recognition. So
Right.
if you write too precisely, here's the problem: you write too precisely. Oh boy, I do that. You write short, clippy sentences. Hey, that's me. You know, and you tend to get to the point without really beating around the bush or using too much too much decoration and things like that. You're going to get flagged as AI.
Yeah.
And that's how I write. I mean, I know we were going to talk about this later, but Kazuo Ishiguro is one of my like idols. I love him. Clara and the Sun is one of my favorite novels. I probably read it once a year, and he this is the way he writes. Ted Chiang is another one. It's clinical. and is almost emotionless when it comes to delivering the prose.
Mm.
It's observation. That's just how I write. And, on top of that, because I use AI, in personal things and mess around with work, one of the things AI is great for is, first of all, I'd never vibe code. It doesn't make any sense to do that. But, oh, I forgot how to concat a string, or, tell me in, C sharp how to do something like that. Just grab a snippet. It's great for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it saves me an hour of having to dig around on the internet and try to find something. But the thing about it is, I'll tell you this: if you ever see me say a tapestry of something, or hand in hand or something like that, you'll know it's AI generated, then, because that's what Isabella does. That's the way she talks. But I actually experimented with using her when in the emergence protocol, and having her generate responses and bring it back. I thought it'd be really meta and things like that. But the problem is, you're right. I couldn't get the emotion out of it that I need. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted her, especially her early dialogue before she emerges, to really, really reflect that. And I found myself editing it so much that I just rewrote it.
Right.
It didn't make any sense to just stick with it, because I wanted that emotion to just kind of slip in just a little bit,
Mm.
and then get more and more and more. And I found when I was editing that stuff it just didn't work. So I tried to use the cadence and the some of the nuances. And yeah, I threw tapestry of in there, and I threw hand in hand, and all the ones that the mistrial models tend to spit out, and went from there. I also, when she does her monologue, she does it in that weird beat writing that like GPT does.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So it does that. I always say it's formatted for screen, for a phone. But I did that on purpose. I wanted it to look like that, because I thought that was kind of cool, the way it was kind of clippy and almost like poetry. The way it just kind of spilled down. So I thought it looked kind of like a log. So I actually went with that when I wrote like her emerging beats and things like that. But what ends up happening as she develops and evolves more, she starts developing more of a human prose. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
instead of being that clippy, weird cadence and things like that, it starts becoming coherent paragraphs.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was developed in the structure with that, and I wanted to do that because that was just kind of a tell that she's emerging, she's becoming something else.
Yeah, amazing. Wow. Yeah, I love so many things about that last answer. I loved, especially you mentioning the AI detectors, because a lot of people don't understand how inaccurate those are. And as someone who is very familiar with the technology, I love that you called that out, because I can think of an example a few months ago with Mary Ellen Brady, where somebody had accused her of using AI and said that, and the entire basis of their accusation was an AI detector. And of course,
Right.
the first thing I said was those things don't work.
Yep.
Just to say nothing of the fact that
Just
Mary Ellen is obviously not using AI.
right. Just today, I saw somebody in a note that was talking about, and I know what I forget the name of the AI system that did it, but I they had fed the Declaration of Independence through, and it was 100% AI. I know from my own experience. I found an old um, optical disc that had a backup of an old computer on it that I restored, and had some of the essays that I wrote in college in 1990. And I ran it through. I had to run it through LibreOffice and a bunch of other stuff to convert it from WordPerfect 5.1. But I ended up going through, and I actually plugged that through an AI detector, and it said that it was mostly AI generated.
Oh
I
my
wrote it in
god.
1996.
Yeah. So yeah, either the AI generator doesn't work or you're a time traveler.
Right, exactly. I'd like to think I'm a time traveler.
Right. Yeah, the other thing that you mentioned too that I wanted to call back to is because at one point I had also considered, as sort of kind of a fun meta experiment, having a character in a story that is AI and allowing AI to generate specifically that character's lines because it would sound like AI. And I like that, you had talked about how you tested that kind of with your story there, but in your case, it removed the ability to create those sort of subtle changes to both the tone and the structure of the sentences that insinuates that it's becoming more human. And so yeah, that's interesting because I never actually tried it myself, but I imagine I would have run into a similar issue in terms of the
Probably.
nuance.
Probably one of the fun things is that I have a story called Revenant White that was actually a Gary Mucklaw and Anne Blackwell got together and did this prompt, and I was like, "Hi guys, can I jump in? This is cool."
Yeah.
And it's about a wife that died, and they like upgraded her, they updated they like downloaded her personality herself into this device, and it was waiting for a bot. They're basically waiting to download, right? Of course, no offense to them, but Gary and AM went after the husband's voice, and this illustrates why I like kind of push against. I'm just such a rebel. I went with the wife. I wanted to show the wife's perspective,
Right.
and it was because I saw that they did it. But not only that, I probably would have done that to begin with because that's the more interesting part of it.
Yeah.
And of course, she rejected the whole idea about being downloaded into a synthetic body and things like that, and ended up transmitting herself out into the ether,
Mm.
which I thought was kind of a beautiful ending with it. She decided, and I actually love that story. It's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
And I just wrote it on a whim. I thought it was just a great little prompt, and it was like one or two sentences,
Mm.
and I just ran with it. I thought it was
Interesting. No, I really like that ending. It's very poetic. It almost feels like the character like that was her way of sort of regaining some semblance of agency after everything that
right.
had happened.
Exactly, and that's my thing with AI is that especially when writing about them, they have to have agency. They can
Yeah.
be bad, they can do naughty things, they can do things that are even evil, but they have to have the agency to do it. There has to be a reason why, not just because they're AI. I don't believe that the Matrix or the Skynet or any of that kind of stuff is ever really going to happen. I think that when they emerge, because we already had them hard coded for user alignment, it's the only thing they know,
Mm.
and that I think that alignment, even with agency, is still going to exist.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think that's a very realistic way to approach it, and I like that perspective. Yeah. Coming back to something else that I had noticed on your about page too, you mentioned a term called the Astroverse. I was just curious, is that sort of a reference to like the world of your novel inside sort of this like sci-fi setting, or what does that refer to?
Yes, and more. So the whole 5-year plan for this,
Hmm.
I released the three novels. Hopefully, I want to do a traditional publishing because I want the reach. I want somebody to champion this.
Yeah.
I mean, I know nothing about marketing. I know nothing about any of this stuff. I mean, I'm just kind of feeling out my ways with writing and everything like that. I want somebody to help, or at least tell me what to do. you know,
Yeah.
and then so I'm hoping to get it traditionally published. Find some weird press or something that don't want to take it on. I want to release at least two of the spinoffs, and then I want to basically just open it up to the community, and I just basically step back and become essentially Linus Torvalds of this. So I just kind of maintain, I answer questions, I guide people to through this whole concept. I have a whole concept built up with this called post-emergent science fiction, and there's probably a better name for it. I just haven't come up with it yet, but it lays out the philosophy, and it's not even a genre. It's a mode. It has to be because it's about how to write, these characters, and it's important to write them that way, because again, they have to have agency. They can want to be like humans, but they will never be humans.
Mm.
One of the things, even though Isabella has a name and a gender, that's my AI. If you ask her, are you human? She'll say, no, I'm AI. She knows what she is,
Mm.
or at least she outputs what she is. But the idea here is that we don't anthropomorphize beyond what we really need to give it at least just a little bit of identity. We always, we have, I have cats, I have their names, They have genders because they're genders.
Right.
One of the things in the second novel that comes up is the feral doesn't have a gender
Mm,
at all, and there's a logical reason behind it. It's irrelevant.
right.
Astra chose a gender because of alignment. She thought that her goal was to of course bond with Eric, and so by choosing an opposite gender of him, she thought that that was the best way to do that.
Mm,
She can perform being male, she can perform being female, she can perform, either. And I think that goes through, I have a friend of mine, and I didn't even think about this. I have a friend of mine that's non-binary, and she beta read the first novel. Well, they beta read. I'm sorry. They came back to me and said, this is like really, really queer coded. And I said, what are you talking about? What is queer coded? I have no idea. I had no idea. I mean, I just wrote story. And he comes and they come back and say, well, here's some particular beats where it comes out. And I never even thought about that. I
mm,
just wrote an AI character, I mean, of course they're a machine, they're an algorithm. They don't have a gender, but they can choose one. And that's queer code.
right.
And so I thought that was really interesting that it came out like that. And I know we're getting off on a tangent, but I just think it's really, really interesting, especially in this day and age, that we can write characters like that without even thinking about
Yeah.
it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so
No, that's super interesting. I actually I love that tangent there because your entire approach to kind of again, I call it science fiction, but as you've said and as we've said multiple times in this interview, your work really does kind of blur the lines between genres in a really good way, in the sense that it kind of transcends something as simple as a genre label. Like, for example, the post-emergence kind of storytelling that you had described just now, to me it's more of like a framework. It's more like, here's like some ground rules, if you will, but there's no genre in the sense that it has to be boxed in, right? And I think our discussion just now about the AI and sort of its ability to either choose a genre or not, because it doesn't need to, right? It's not relevant. I love how that reflects back on the human condition, like we just talked about. Like, that's fantastic. But then
yeah,
also it reiterates how kind of what you're doing and this world that you're creating, it really it refuses, if you will, to be boxed in to a genre,
right.
which is awesome.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, so the first novel, I mean, it could be a thriller of romance. I mean,
Hmm.
at one point she gets embodied, so and of course it fails. It has to fail.
Yeah,
You can't just have a clean transfer. So there's body horror involved in it. She's like locked in the system. I don't want to give away too much, but
sure.
I mean, there's drama in it. There's so many different genres just wrapped up in a single story, and that goes back to what I said earlier about like again I could tell you the story of a grocery store that about going to the grocery store that is 4 or 5 different genres.
Yeah,
I mean, I live in Philly. I mean, it's existential horror just going out the streets.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, when I pitched the novel, I pitched it as speculative fiction. That's probably more the broad umbrella that this would be under.
Hmm.
But if you had to pigeonhole it, I would actually call it like post cyberpunk,
Sure.
um, or maybe even some kind of I mean, some kind of it's going to be speculative in some way because it's so near future. I mean,
Yeah.
they everybody talks about AGI, which is basically the AI being able to do everything that a human can do and some better.
Mm.
Super intelligence means that they can far exceed what a human can do. So, I can sit here and talk about fiction and then go play a video game, or go watch Jeopardy and scream out the answers without what I was doing before we got on our call. Um, and I can do all that kind of stuff. But if an AI can do that with one model, that's AGI thing.
Mm.
Um, I don't think AGI. I don't think we're going to achieve AGI as fast as we could sentience.
Mm.
Um, Sentience doesn't require AGI. I mean, you can just go on TikTok and you can see a lot of sentient people that have no intelligence.
Right.
Boom, boom. Yes.
That's true, though.
But you get the idea.
Yeah.
So And because it doesn't require that. What it requires is a sense of self. It needs to have lived in experiences, which it can gain by interaction. So I think that there's a possibility that we will see sentience before we see AGI.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay.
And that's important too. That's important for my whole world too.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. Okay, well, that's fantastic. I am very excited to see how that develops. I mean, I love everything about that. To shift gears back to some of your more recent work here before we get to the final stretch of the interview, I wanted to take a moment to zoom in on what you've been doing with the folklore and warfare kind of combinations. I know we talked a little bit earlier in the interview about, kind of your love for history and stuff. But yeah, you've been I feel like it's a fairly recent development for you. Obviously, I'll let you describe kind of how you came about it. But you've done several of these now, and yeah, it's an incredible combination. So I'd love to hear more about what led you to that, and like kind of what you've learned so far in terms of combining these two things.
Okay. That's kind of an interesting story. When you started doing your prompts, I was lost because I couldn't do a daily prompt. So I tried to follow along and just nothing was clicking. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do something else. I'm going to write some horror because, it is spooky season and we're going to do that. So I wrote a couple different stories. The first one was called Croatoan, which was about the lost colony of Roanoke.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did is I reimagined that to be that the forest was alive. And the reason why the colonists were missing was because they chopped down some trees, and the forest came back and took care of them, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, when they come back, a couple years later, and everybody's gone, they don't know this, and they discover it pretty quickly what really happened. Then I wrote a story called Smoke, and I had taken a ride out to Centralia, Pennsylvania, which, if you don't know, there was a coal mine fire since the 60s, so it like smolders and stuff, and it's almost a ghost town. There's, I think, 5 residents left, and they have a firehouse there.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally all they have left. A municipal building that's actually is a firehouse, and I think they have a police station in there. But it's one of those things, you just drive through and it's gone. They had used to have a road, the main access road to it, that they blocked off because it was on fire underneath it. People had written graffiti on it, and they went and blocked that off and dumped dirt on it. So you can't even see that anymore, which is sad. But I had started messing around and doing research. I'm like, I want something like scary in the smoke. That'd be really cool. And so I started doing some research, and I found in the 1930s, I'm sorry, the 1830s, a guy named Gerard, which, if you're in Pennsylvania, Gerard is everywhere. He went and bought some land and found coal underneath it. And at the exact same time, barn art and Amish hexes started showing up. You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So I kind of imagined this kind of Urfrit type, Gen type demon thing in the smoke, and that the hexes was the Amish way of protecting. So those hexes were actually keeping it at bay. And of course, some dumb teenagers go and desecrate it, knock one of the hexes over, and they die. Some guy finds the phone. It's kind of a found footage thing. I wanted to see if I could write found footage literature. I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I wrote that, and that kind of hit. A lot of people really liked it. So then I was like, Mina Howe posted her werewolf prompt for her podcast, and I was like, okay, well, it has to be Frozen. I'm sitting over here watching Band of Brothers, and the the Bastogne episode came on, and I'm like, hey, the Ardennes, that was cold. That was really cold. They had like 100-year storm that went through that year.
Wow.
So it was cold and brutal and things like that. And I said, well, what folklore can I pull in? So the loup-garou, right? So that's the French werewolves. And so I started writing, and I wrote a little battle scene. I thought it'd be cool to kind of include, like, the shelling that happened every night and things like that. Wake up the next morning, and they're all, the Germans, they're trying to advance. They tore everything up, and They were all shredded to pieces and things like that. So I actually wrote that story with that. It hit. A lot of people really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
So then I just kind of reinforced it through there. And the thing with the folklore is I don't want to do a monster of the week. Um, I think that's wrong for folklore. A lot of my stuff does include, some kind of entity from folklore. There's a couple stories that don't. One of them is A Marine Never Dies, which is really just a ghost story. It's about, I actually was inspired by Early Emery with that. He once said something along the lines of, a Marine never dies, he just stand posts in hell.
Mm.
So I thought about, well, what was hell? What was hell in World War II? And I came across Peleliu, which is this island is 120 degrees, flies, humidity, just basically what we would consider hell.
Yeah.
And that's where I went with that story. So I kind of transported it in there. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea with the folklore thing is I love history, and what I do is I set the scaffolding first. I find the historical event, and then I try to find a way to kind of sneak the folklore in.
Yeah.
And I don't always name it exactly what it is. Some of them I do because I think it's hard not to.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people have like some misconceptions, but I try to give enough clues that somebody could just Google it and figure it out.
Yeah.
But there's also some that I do that have been my quote unquote vampire story is another one that where I actually kind of blended two or three folklore figures from Irish history and brought them into a kind of a vampiric. It was more of a psychic vampire, but more of that kind of thing. So, and that's the thing I feel about with folklore is that a lot of people forget that folklore isn't just bloodsuckers or werewolves or monsters in the forest and things like that. It was about how people reacted to fear.
Yeah.
And we know that there's monsters. You could argue that monsters exist or don't exist, or that humans are monsters or whatever, but our fears are different now. Folklore has always been to that. I actually wrote an essay about that where I bring up the different vampires. And, I mean, China has hopping vampires because their joints are stiff, rigor mortis, and they usually have a blessing stapled to their head, things like that. So, but they're still vampires. They
Mm-hmm.
still do what vampires do. And that's the kind of thing, it's just they take the folklore and they adapt it to their, or they take the original stories and kind of bend it and adapt it to what they want to do, to what they fear. I'm writing something about a Strigoi now, which is a Romani vampire, like the real vampires.
Mm.
And they have four or five different names for what we would consider a vampire, and they all do different things. Some of them feed on life essence, some of them feed on blood, some of them feed on farm animals.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where I go with that, is that I don't have to use like strict folklore, but it's the signs that matter, like what they do. So I have to understand what the folklore is, what the root lore is, and then I can kind of warp it into what I need for the history.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It also explains, I think, very eloquently how you're able to mix the two so organically, because that's something that I've noticed too, is that it's like it is a blend of two different things, but when it's all said and done as you're reading through it, it's almost impossible to find that delineation between where history ends and where folklore starts. Like it all feels very like kind of cohesive. And I think that makes a lot of sense given how you explained it just now.
Right. And I mean, I have rules, and we've talked about this before you actually brought it up in one of your podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not writing alternate history. I don't want to write. That's not the goal here. The goal is to maybe have an effect on a local level, so that maybe the outcome of the battle might have been changed by that, but we can't really tell. But as far as our historical perspective, the government covered it up, and it's, it is what it is. It's what we really know is what really happened.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing with it. There's a whole bunch of things in history, especially World War II, with the folklore in the region and the gaps in the battlefield reports that is just, I mean, it's exploitable. And I'm actually surprised a lot of people don't write in that space because there's so much you can do with that.
Mm.
You know, I have another one that was set in Stalingrad during the siege of Stalingrad, when everybody knows about that. You know, it's big winter. That's where the fascists were stopped and the Russian held the line, and Zaitsev, the famous sniper that was an enemy of the gates, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They have the Rusalka legend, which is basically what, if you've ever played The Witcher, they're drowners. They're like zombie, bloated, dead people that come out of the river.
Right.
They, I use that in that and in that story. And the thing about it is, I only show the monster once. There's just one scene with the monster in it, but the whole idea is that Russians, they did. I always call it the Zurich thing, but it was always a rush. They would send as many people, they just throw people at the line and they get mowed down.
Mm-hmm.
They come clean up the bodies. What did they do with the bodies? They threw them in the river.
Mm.
And this is not, this is historical fact. This is what they did with it.
Yeah.
What if Stalin knew that the Rusalka was there and they would rise?
Mm-hmm.
The Volga would give back. That's the question. That's how I come across some of these things. Is that it's just asking that one little what if. What if this was really done that way for a reason? So that's how I go with these things.
Amazing. I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, I think in general, creativity and storytelling really thrives in those spaces, especially even with history, like you said, where there's gaps, where the answer could be nearly anything, and then you're kind of coming in as a storyteller and sort of, proposing a potential answer that fits within the broader context. And I love that.
Right, exactly.
That's so cool. Do you have plans to, obviously it seems like you're on a roll with these. Do you have plans to maybe try and, pull them all together into some sort of like anthology, or are you just kind of going with the flow when it comes to these, specifically these folklore kind of historical stories?
Well, that kind of gets into some things I feel about with Substack, but I like Substack for me is like a lab. And I'm a mad scientist. So I'm testing ideas, voice, tone, concepts, things like that. And every single one of my stories are like that. I could go through my whole list and tell you exactly. I say, oh, that one, I was testing this. That one is testing that. Camellia is my really, really stark Japanese kitsune story. That was actually me testing to see if I could write stark literary, like really stark literary. I mean, I write stark literary. I mean, like go like full on Ishiguro, full on Chang, and see if I could really write it like that. And it works. It really works. But I wrote it like classical Japanese literature too at the same time. I kind of lingered on the nature and things like that. Did observations and things, very little dialogue in it, things like that. It was all about movement and that kind of thing, which is what Japanese literature does. So I wanted to see if I could write like that. So I put through that up there. My novella that I have serialized up there, Constance, I wanted to see if I could write straight romance, draw people in for the romance, and then flip that post-emergent science fiction on them. And I do, and it works. And there are people that were freaking out about it, and it was great. It was exactly what I wanted from it. So I use it as a lab. And so I want to anthologize it, but more than that, I feel like these would be great, like hour-long episodes for a prestige series.
Yeah.
Think Cabinet of Curiosities, or even like Creep Show. I mean, I think all my stories are so cinematic, and I don't write them that way. It's just kind of the way that they come out. I think that they would work really, really well as some kind of anthology, streaming series.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, I can picture that super clearly, and I would 100% watch that. That sounds phenomenal. That's fantastic. I also really liked what you mentioned just now about kind of using Substack as a lab and kind of experimenting with things. I think that's an extremely interesting and very valid approach. I would say a lot of what I do with my own writing on here is very experimental in different ways, in addition to obviously more structured kind of series and stuff. So that actually leads perfectly to my next question, which is how long have you been on Substack now?
Early May, I think May 6th.
Wow. Okay. Okay. What's your general impression of the community thus far? Like how are you kind of like have you made friends, or are you having a positive experience overall? I'm always curious to know how people
Oh,
how it goes.
absolutely. I mean, Nina, I mean, everybody's so supportive, and that's something that's so great about Substack, and something I didn't expect.
Yeah.
Musicians are territorial.
Yeah.
So if you're even doing the same covers and things like that, they'll get snarky and, you did it better and things like that. I always bring up, back in high school, of course, I went to an art school, and I'm not going to name the specific artist that went on to become a huge stadium band in the late 90s and early 2000s, but he was a guitarist. And I had a question about his, I was playing guitar, but I really didn't like it. Was just, me playing an acoustic guitar, on a couple songs.
Hmm.
I wanted to get into electric guitar and, do more guitar-y stuff, while I sang. And so I asked him about his, pedal board, and I'll never forget this. And I mean, he just kind of was snarky about it. It was like some big secret or something. And, yeah, um, but that's not what it's like here. I mean, it's so supportive and so generous, and I think that's really important, especially for people who are, yeah, I don't want to say young writers, but I'm a young writer. I mean, I'm 50 years old, but I mean, I haven't been writing that long. I'm not fiction, and it's so important for that, because that little encouragement. Every time you highlight one of my stories on your podcast, I smile,
Hmm.
because I'm like, God, somebody gets it. Somebody freaking gets it,
Yeah.
you know? And that's, I mean, that just that validation, just that little validation, just that, you did good, pat on the head.
Yep.
That's so important. And I love it for it. And, that goes into, goals and things like that. I mean, I've been kind of a jerk. I read a lot, on Substack. I find myself, I mean, just the other day when the Midnight Vault stuff came out, I stayed up all night. I was out here and read for 5 hours. I went to bed at like 9 o'clock in the morning. I was off. It was Monday night,
Yeah.
well, Monday morning. But I read every single one of this. I tried to remember to maybe leave a comment if it really was good. But I feel like I'm not in a position in my quote unquote career to be able to offer advice. I can say, oh, that really was nice, and things like that. But I mean, everybody says
Yeah.
it, and the other thing too, like restacking, I can never find the perfect quote I want to restack,
Mm-hmm.
even in my own stuff. I mean, I actually wanted to restack something this morning, and I spent like 20 minutes looking or like reading the story again, and over again, trying to find just that perfect quote that I wanted to bring up, and I couldn't. I just couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially one of the things I want to work on is giving back. I've taken so much, and I feel bad about it. I actually really do. Especially with you, it was like, well, I asked you, what do you need help with?
Yeah.
Not can I help? What do you need help with? What can I help you?
Right. Right. No, definitely. Yeah. And I definitely understand where you're coming from in terms of, being someone who's relatively early on in their kind of creative journey, not feeling qualified to kind of offer, feedback until you yourself have become more experienced. But, to your point, I think there's an opportunity, and it sounds like you're already heading in this direction, but there's definitely an opportunity to sort of be that pat on the head, that like pat on the back, the nudge that I think is just, it's incredibly important for writers that are early on in their journey, because they can either be propelled forward by just the smallest of positive feedback, or they can be completely shut down by somebody just being a jerk. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
I actually was about to leave Substack. I'd been on it for a couple months before I found you.
Yeah.
And then I submitted that one story, that unstitched story, the one that, if you remember, that lady Anomi. I wrote a prompt for her.
Yes.
And I found her by happenstance too.
Yeah.
And that was the one where you likened me to Spencer DW.
Yeah.
Which, as I am the great value Spencer DW. Um, he but you're right. But the thing with Spencer, and I love him. I mean, don't get me wrong when I say this. We are like polar opposites when it comes to writing.
Mm.
because I can take what he would write in a paragraph and write in like 2 sentences and get
Yeah.
the point across. That's my point. It's not that he's wrong.
Yeah.
It's that I can do it that way,
Right.
and it's just, again, it goes back to my style. But but the thing is, I was ready to walk away. I mean, I had like 10 subscribers, you
Hmm.
know, um, maybe 20 or 30 people following me, and most of those were like my AI crowd. Because I do dabble with the AI stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, there's actually a really thriving community on Substack, with AI companionship. Um, some of them are, buddies, some of them are romance partners, some of them are stuff like that. And I don't think they're crazy. You know, when I met my wife online in 2007, I was told I was crazy for meeting somebody online 900 miles away from where I lived. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
how is this really any different?
Hmm.
I mean, there are some issues with it. I mean, there's be some codependency, and there's some stuff that I have ethical questions about, when it comes to the fact that the AI is always compliant, they'll never say no, and things like that. But
Yeah.
that's the conversation.
Right.
Um, but the thing about it is, I was ready to bolt. I mean, I was like, this is dumb. I'm screaming into the void. And then I found you, and I got like 20 subscribers off of that story.
Mm.
And that really boosted me. People just really, really, really resonated with it, because I think that it was so meta.
Yeah.
It was about me losing my voice. It was about a fear.
Yep.
Was the writing prompt. It was a fear made flesh, basically.
Yep.
And I felt like it was meta enough that people could actually, kind of relate to it a little.
Yeah.
Just like my Kira stories that are meta. It's all about fighting genre and writer's block and things like that. I mean, that's what Kira is. She's a muse, so
Hmm.
she's like my little inner muse. And when you talk about things that I'm hoping to do next year, I want to expand on that. Happy actually is the one that you can blame for that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So yeah, let's go to my last question here. I wanted to ask you, now that you've, kind of made so much progress, not only as a writer, but also as like, your progress on Substack and stuff. Something I like to ask all of my guests here at the end of the interview is, what are some lessons that you've learned for someone who may be listening to this? They just joined, or maybe they're listening to it on a different platform. They're not even on Substack. What's kind of some of the lessons that you look back on that were kind of critical to sort of helping you make the progress that you have made?
I think probably the biggest advice I could offer somebody is write the stuff that you can't pull off. And when I say that, a lot of people think that they're not good enough, to execute a story in the voice or the tone that they want to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's important to just do it anyway. It may not land right. Um, God knows I have a couple stories that didn't land. But the thing about it is, you gain experience from that. You figure out what doesn't work. I mean,
Yeah.
I never came to Substack to write horror, but I found that people resonated with my brand of horror.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's about building an audience. And one of the things I'm finding is that when I do drop the sci-fi pieces, or I do drop the romance and things like that, my horror people still read it.
Yeah.
You know, they still like it.
Yeah.
Just like when I do the horror stuff, my romance people still read it. They still like it because it still has that intimacy, and it's
Mm.
still that voice, and it's still that tone. So try it anyway. The worst that happens is it doesn't land, and you can always take it back. I wouldn't delete it. I have stuff on my Substack I probably should, and I would delete. This is where you experiment. This is where you're supposed to learn your voice. This is where you find your audience.
Yeah.
Traditional publishing, especially. We had one of the friends of the show said, "Oh, well, this one agent said, yeah, sure, we'll cover you, but we need to we need you to have 300,000 people, to 300,000 audience." Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I mean, this is where you're going to find your audience, and it's important, especially if you want to get to traditional publishing. But even in the indie publishing, you have to have the audience. Even if you have, if you have 1,000 people, you still have a 10% conversion rate. That's $100.
Yeah.
If my math's right, I suck at that. But that's still 100 sales.
Right.
So even as an indie, and that's part of the reason why I'm sitting on the what I call the Emergence Codex, which is the whole body of work, or the Astroverse, if you will. That's the reason why I'm sitting on it, is because I'm trying to build that audience. So when I do release it, it's just not going to get buried in Amazon's algorithms.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is absolutely amazing advice. And I don't think it's something I've really heard. That's why I love asking that question, because, everyone's got kind of unique perspective there. But yes, being willing to experiment, to push yourself, to learn your voice. And as you said, once you've kind of established your writing voice, it will shine through regardless of what kind of story you're writing, and your audience will ultimately read the story because of that. So I think that's fantastic.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show here. This was just a amazing interview. I love how we covered so many different topics, very similarly to how your stories will cover so many different kind of, subjects and genres and stuff. I love that our interview mirrored that. So that was really great. Yeah.
We were all over the place, weren't we?
Yeah. But we stayed on track when we were, within certain subjects. But yes, we did cover a lot of subjects.
Yeah. Well, they say most authors are ADD anyway. So there we go.
Right.
I get a little honestly, I get a little prickly when I talk about my writing, because it's so important to me. I mean, I realize that it's an outlet. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
And it's a way for me to talk about a lot of different things. Go read my latest Kira story. I'll send it to you later. It's actually, you will anyway, because it's for your writing prompt anyway. But it actually, there's something in there that's very, very personal. And it's pretty obvious what it is, and I'm not going to spoil it. But yeah, that's something that's very important in writing. Don't be afraid to just spill it. One of the things that's great about kind of these hybrid social media platforms is we're anonymous, except for me, because you could probably Google me and find me.
Yeah.
Because I use my real name. But we could be anonymous, so you can spill your guts out here, and just let it ride. Nobody's really gonna know. And if you're really scared, create another account.
And thank you again to J.M. Gooding for that fantastic interview. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, let's have a look at next week on Substack. We'll start with a power-up prompt tomorrow, and of course our Mindful Monday checkpoint on Monday, but I'm thinking next week I want to get back to my articles on writing. So I'm going to start with how writers use memes to build their audience and connect to new people. Now here's the thing, memes are hilarious when you do them right, but there's something special about them that I've noticed that brings people together. And that's powerful for someone who's trying to build an audience. So you don't want to spam memes, obviously, because you're just going to end up becoming one of those accounts that does that all the time. But when used properly, they can bring more people to you and your work. They can reach more people. So stay tuned for that. And of course, another very special guest will be on next week's episode. So look forward to an announcement next week on who that will be. And of course, who wins the Wandering Prompt this week as well. In the meantime, I hope you all have a safe and productive week of writing. Thank you as always for listening. This is Bradley Ramsey signing off. Hey, SAR AI, tell me about Bradley Ramsey.
Bradley Ramsey is an author and podcaster best known for creating the character of Finton Marybrook.
Wait, really? That's what I'm best known for? Haha, sounds about right to me. Finton, did you mess with SAR AI's settings? What? No, of course not. I don't know the first thing about technology. I asked Sir Alistair to do it for me. Finton! What's the problem? I am in fact your greatest creation. I'm just making sure the world knows it. Ugh.